You, my friend, are watching Hearthstone Grandmasters here for the Asia Pacific region, the first region of the day, as it is every single day for the next every single day on Friday, Saturday, Sunday for the next 8 weeks. APAC first, then Europe, and then Americas to close out the day. It was a very long broadcast day yesterday, I think it's fair to say, approaching 21 hours of Hearthstone action, so it's understandable that you may not be able to catch all of it. All the VODs, however, are up on the Hearthstone Esports YouTube channel, so you can catch up on your favorite players. One of your favorite players, I think it's fair for me to assume, maybe Tyler as well. Very, very popular Hearthstone streamer. Been doing it for a long time and still right up there with the best of them in terms of his Hearthstone play. And he's going to have to be going up against Posesi. I think also fair to say a little bit less well known amongst the English-speaking Hearthstone community, but that I hope will not be the case for long because he is one of my favorite players to watch here in APAC.
Definitely agree, especially given that his performance last season was pretty stellar and also some consistent Masters Tour placements. I think Posesi is definitely making his way to a lot of people's favorite player lists as well. And for this matchup heading into the very last series of the day, it has become a double priest ban. It's been a while, Darek. We've cast a fair amount of priests today, which is why we're going on a bit longer than you might expect from APAC.
Yeah, I think Tyler here is. This is something we see from him often because I think a lot of players would make the argument that for Tyler, Warrior is the deck to ban because he's got the aggressive rogue, and we've seen the priest struggle against that as well to a certain extent. But I think Tyler is a strong believer in his opinions about the meta, and I fully anticipate that he's a strong priest believer. He's been jamming it a lot on ladder, and has a great record with it so far this tournament as well. And I think with that out the way, his slightly weaker decks are left remaining. And yet again, I'm seeing the trend that maybe I'm not giving the Druid enough credit, but due to the aggressive decks that are... Oh, no, sorry. I was looking at the wrong lineup here. For Posesi, the Druid, I think, actually should be in a good spot due to his kind of slow, controlling lineup that we saw.
Could very well be the case. I also want to make the note that these days, control decks are not even running weapon removal. Perhaps it's too early in a meta to say that I should be running Ooze or even Harrison in these lists. But if we look at control warriors of old, those were almost auto-includes. And if the weapon rogue is able to run free with that self-sharpening sword, I wouldn't even put it in that bad of a spot versus warrior. We could see that matchup right now, actually.
That's exactly right. Blistering start for both of these players, and a very nice start as well for Posesi. I will say, being able to find Ankar is great there off of the Corsair cache to find the risky skipper, to go with the Armorsmith. It's a long chain of discovery that you have to go along to get there, but it will be worth the wait, I'm sure.
For Tyler, while he did have a nice opener, this whole hand is dependent on a weapon draw very, very soon. I guess you'll settle for Dagger Deadly Poison to just unlock. Yeah, not necessarily this turn because he'll want to have both charges on it, but just able to curve out into Dr. Krastanov and get down at least Steel Dancer for a 4-cost minion. Still nothing to scoff at.
How did you feel about going for the Spy Mistress instead of the Deadly Poison? Because although it's not especially overwhelming, I was looking at just the curve of Deadly Poison, Steel Dancer, and then Krastanov plus double Dread Corsair on 5.
Yeah, that does look pretty interesting. I would have to consider if the average difference between a 3-cost and 4-cost card is very big. My gut feeling says yes. And maybe that extra bit of stats is what Tyler is prioritizing here to try and get some more value versus Warrior. This curve of Deadly Poison into Dread Corsair first is still a pretty decent amount of threat.
Ooh, Cutting Class, not a bad card whatsoever to fill out the rest of his mana on this turn. But it does, of course, mean that due to his line of going for the Spy Mistress last turn, it's a little bit slower tempo, it's got to be said, over this turn and arguably the next turn as well.
And I think that's alright for Tyler, as long as he can stick a board that's not particularly vulnerable to Brawl, then he should be in a pretty good spot. The difference now is that when you play around Brawl, a lot of the time you play into Bladestorm, so it's going to be difficult to actually build that right kind of set of threats, especially since Steel Dancer, you can't quite pinpoint the exact size of a minion it's going to generate.
So
For
obviously now
Posesi this turn, there is a possibility for an early skipper play if he likes. Armor Smith skipper, Kobold Lackey, or even Sky Raider.
That's the obvious line, right, of going for just gaining the armor while you can. But do you think there's any reason to hold on to it for a bigger board sweep? Are you going to have to clear off bigger minions? Or do you like just getting it down now while you can?
I like the idea of getting it down if you're able to still have the Armor Smith alive on board. Because then you are not just healing for the immediate armor you get this turn, but also likely having it tank some damage. It's just awkward that it lines up into the Krastenov turn. And so that's a minion that wants to be rushing into something anyway. And Posesi is saying, I don't want any minions on board for this turn in case there is the Krastenov.
Yeah, that's a big part of it for sure. And I think it's also just playing, I think, justifiably greedy with the armor gain. He just wants to get as much as he humanly can.
Asus Rager is not what Tyler wanted to see here. Skipper can make nice and easy work of this board alongside Armor Smith and Kobold Lackey. Can also play Battle Rage if he likes.
It looks pretty clean, right? Just in combination with the Kobold Lackey at the end to perfectly clear the board.
I guess there was some small consideration for armoring up instead there. Just because this deck puts out a lot of damage really, really quickly, and maybe that little bit of armor could justify it. But in the long run, drawing towards second sword and board could just give him that much armor or even cheaper cost.
Yeah, I agree completely. You want to make sure that you have, at all points, the ability to absolutely clear the board every single turn with no doubt whatsoever. And that's what I think Posesi has bought himself at the cost of 2 armor. It's a very fair price to pay.
This turn, the risky skipper is going to die immediately after a minion is played. So, a slight misordering. He could have just attacked the skipper into the Corsair. Or unless he wanted the damage on the Krasanov. And he does for the sword and board. It's my mistake.
Again, just nice and clean. Clearing up the board every single turn is really, I think, all that Posesi needs to do, because eventually I feel like this should get there. Unless, of course, self-sharpening sword can come down. That is, as I keep saying, what the entire strategy revolves around. You want to get that as buff as anything, and then hope that that can get there, which, as it looks like, I think that could still get there. It's possible for Tyler to take this.
I find it unlikely because Tyler obviously doesn't want to override his 4 attack on the current dagger. And so the sword and self-sharpening sword is still going to take another turn to get up to 2 attack, and another up to 3. In the meantime, Tyler's facing down this 5/5 without an immediate way to deal with it because Backstab can't target it because it's damaged. And Posesi's also sitting on these double shield blocks. So Tyler is hoping for something a little bit more impactful off this secret passage.
That is true.
Gets the sword into deadly poison immediately. Nothing to scoff at.
And the double shield block is a good thing to point out. And I think the other thing I maybe overlooked was the fact that a lot of the weapon buffs have actually gone. You know, Krastenov, one of the deadly poisons. There's the second one as well. There's not really all that much that Tyler can do.
The sticky finger! Posesi was smiling about something. I was like, wait, what's he so happy about? And then I looked at the hand.
Yeah.
Oh! So
Disgusting.
many people need to take showers today, Derek.
Yeah, well, with sticky fingers, you'd hope so.
I give up. The insta-concede from Tyler, I don't blame him at all.
Yep, it just feels like that's what the deck is trying to do, right? The Warrior. We've seen it function in some of the weirder matchups against the control decks, but here with against the aggro, that's the point of the deck, right? It's an anti-aggro control Warrior doing what it does best against Rogue and not really giving any chance whatsoever in just a very clean game. Very well played from Posesi. Not too much to say about it.
Not quite sure who he was talking to at the end there, or if he was just saying, yeah, Tyler, get it. Get wrecked. For the next game, though, it seems like Tyler could have some pretty good reasons for queuing that Rogue up again, because we were looking at the Warrior potentially being its worst matchup. And now that that's out of the way, we could very well see it take a win versus Posesi's Druid. As far as Demon Hunter, though, that might also be a struggle point because Demon Hunter has a ton of healing, but against specifically the weapon-oriented version, if the Demon Hunter doesn't have ways to freeze or remove a weapon, I feel like the self-sharpening sword could still get a lot of work done.
It could be really interesting, couldn't it? Because even though we frame Demon Hunter as a control deck, which is somewhat accurate, to be fair, it's got a lot of removal spells and it's got a lot of healing, it could very well end up with both players just whacking each other in the head with their weapons, whilst pretty much completely ignoring what's on the board for the most part, or using their removal spells each for that purpose, because they both have a lot of damage that you can deal from hand. And you raise a good point. I'm not entirely sure how that matchup would play out.
Yeah, I am excited to see that just changing from Hearthstone to, I guess, more whack-a-mole would be very, very interesting. And I think that in terms of the stealth minions, at least, that's a good way to get in a lot of near guaranteed damage at the beginning of the game. Later on, though, it becomes less so because of the Shatter Shard Mystics and the Blade Dances. So as far as the game plan for Tyler, I think he is definitely looking for, as always, the sword. And every time I see cutting class drawn, I'm just more and more blown by how cool that card is.
Yeah, it is absolutely ludicrous, it's got to be said. But as we can see there, it's going to be a tall order to defeat this Demon Hunter, given how positive of a win rate Posesi is rocking with it so far. I think it's fair to say that most players weren't really anticipating it, weren't really prepared for the Demon Hunter, because when you're prepping your matchups, you're going to be fighting up against more the mages, the druids, the rogues, in order to get in the reps in those matchups. This one, not so much, and that is, I think, hurting a lot of the players.
Yeah, definitely speaks to the that Posesi's in, and he has already kept that Magtheridon in the open. Definitely a lot of sense against Druid, in my opinion, because Druid is one of those decks that can get their minions out of the range of a simple Blade Dance a lot of the time. And so the Demon Hunter can go for an alternate strategy of being the first to put down a big minion. Magtheridon, Druid has no way to remove or transform the 1/3s. And so even if it's not all done on the same turn, the Magtheridon can go off. It can also potentially shut off Tyler's own development the turn after, because Magtheridon, when it leaves the door, destroys every other minion on board.
And we saw some quite interesting interplay with exactly that factor in the matchup last time we saw Posesi, when Chauncey was playing this, I believe, yesterday, operating the same deck, where he was very just laissez-faire with how he used the Destroy effect. He was using Magtheridon purely to get a 12-12, and for no other effect, really, when you think about it. Whereas I was anticipating the Magtheridon being used to obviously get a 12-12, but also hopefully destroy a Twilight Runner or some other couple of beasts along the way.
Yeah. It could very well be the case for next turn. Posesi not starting with the Magtheridon because he recognizes the threat of Gidra into Overgrowth is too big, so he prioritized getting that Marrow Slice. So very important that it is a trigger for Blade Dance once this Magtheridon does go down.
And there it is. Absolutely time to get rocking and a-rolling with that one. Next turn, Blade Dance ready to go, should he need it to completely obliterate them.
Oh man, this Twilight Runner saying goodbye real soon.
Yeah,
whether it be from the Blade Dance or if it gets, if the Blade Dance hits the 3 rightmost minions, it just gets caught in the crossfire of Magtheridon.
Yeah, it just works out pretty clean, right? He can sweep everything up even if he misses, and then draw a card as well if he wants to with Mana Feeder as well.
Feeder, Panthera, yeah. It would have to depend where the Blade Dances had gone, because if it hit the 3 1/3s and then Posesi wouldn't have had to swing into a minion, I think he would prefer Hero Power here, but now that he does have to swing into a minion to activate Magtheridon, probably just going to be Volpera Scoundrel.
I grow impatient.
There's a question of whether he wanted to wake it up at all, because Tyler is going into the territory where ramp into Guardian Animals is very likely. very curious interaction. Because if Posesi kept that dormant just on board, what does Tyler do?
Yeah, like, he wouldn't have been able to play a minion, else Tyler would have sacrificed it in and then played the Guardian animals, but he could have just played the Eldraki Warblades, right?
Yeah. And there's also, I guess, this issue in particular of Lake Thrasher. If you put down another minion, then it gets to cleave into the lower attack minion. And the Magthera, while able to take a value trade, is much more vulnerable to dying soon.
That's true. The other thing to consider is, of course, that he does now have a 12 attack minion in play, and no combination of beasts on their own could have taken it out. And so now he gets to smack for 12 and try and remove the others, at least partially, with like the Soul Shard Lapidary here.
Yeah, that can get the job done alongside Hero Power. Or rather just a Spirit Jailer, because then Magtheridon could potentially trade into Lake Thrasher. It just feels bad to trade, but if you're playing another minion and leaving a cleave up on board, it sounds kind of sketchy.
I guess the real question is whether or not you're actually trading here. I guess giving the Lake Thresh the ability to attack into the Soul Shard is a little bit scary.
Well, if he is not trading, I don't think he's supposed to play another minion here.
Right.
Okay, Blade Dance to partially deal with the board. Across 2 turns, he will be able to kill off both of the Threshers, or the Threshers into the Magtheridon, and Posesi still gets his 12 to face. It was a very interesting line.
It really is pretty scary now for Tyler. The overflow, obviously, kind of disastrous in terms of healing up the Magtheridon at the same time.
Yeah, he can go for a mini Mount Seller turn. But I am just looking at the overflow still, and at the very least, he can end the turn with a taunt on board for that Anubis Hath Defender.
Weirdly enough, though, the more I look at it, the more I just like Posesi's line he took there on the previous turn, not leaving anything to attack into with the cleave effect. Saving the Soul Shard Lapidary to be able to go face is a pretty big deal as well.
Yeah, there were tons of different ways you could take it, but I do think it was consistent in the thinking that if you are going to play a minion, you have to trade, and if you're not, if you're face, then you can't leave any cleave targets.
So now there's no way to quite cleanly get enough attack to take out the Mount Seller, I believe.
Yeah, looks like he's just gonna have to send old Maggie into it. Which is fine. He got... Oh! No, not enough mana.
Close, but no cigar.
Fine, you can just play the Lapidary, send the 9 damage to face, and still end the turn with a 5/5.
Such a beautiful shield.
Definitely not too upset to see this.
Yeah, for trading into a minion here.
Weird thing is, though, that this is actually where things start to turn around for Tyler. Despite still getting all this damage to face, you know, being close to delivering lethal, it's really not that bad for Tyler. He's clearing off the board now. He's healing up a little bit. He can get some taunts in the way, clear off the board, all this good kind of stuff. And at the end of it, he's moving towards his own win condition now. Ysera able to come down next turn. It's huge.
He really has turned the corner. And Posesi's burst damage is running short now. He only has this Eldraki Warblades. There's a little bit more cycle with that Panthera. Are we looking at another strength in numbers?
Right. It's like, it's kind of good, right? He can't activate it next turn, quite obviously, with just Ysera. But there's some pretty decent minions he can get.
Going for the carvings instead. It's removal to some extent. Kind of a panic button. And Posesi is on the ropes now.
To an extent,
Okay.
yes.
Volpera, crucially, if it picks up Skull, it can't be played alongside it this turn. So
True.
I wonder if he's meant to play the Panthera instead first.
Well, he still couldn't get Skull, right?
He can't, but then spend the rest of his mana on
Ah,
the 3 cards on the left now. So just Eldrazi, Spiritual and Eye Beam to deal with this 3/5. I like that. Unlike Chonsu's build yesterday, Posesi is not running anything in the way of fancy tech. There's no mage hunters in here to possibly silence this huge Ysera. What there is though is Lorekeeper Polkelp, Militia at the top, followed by Skull of Gul'dan. There's quite a few good draws.
yeah, I mean, that's really weird, right? Because then Skull of Gul'dan is like guaranteed to draw expensive cards as well, which is, I guess, pretty good. You know, you don't want to be cheated out on your full 3-mana discount.
Double Jump will draw him an Outcast card, so Skull is
Skull's
I
it,
think
right?
the only one in the list.
Yeah, with double Eye Beam gone. So, I mean, you kind of want to save that for the next turn, but I guess with nothing else to spend your mana on, you may as well.
Mm-hmm. It's just so awkward here. Can't Mystic, that just blows up his own board. Hardly scratches you, Sarah.
I grow impatient.
I wonder if there was perhaps an alternate way to approach the matchup. This is so early on in the expansion where we're kind of still theorizing how you go about it in the macro game plan, but I keep going back to the what if Posesi Theradon on Darman and just said, you can't play anything, Tyler, until I tell you to, essentially. As he held back entirely, just hoping that double jump into Skull can get something more impactful done.
Right. I mean, it makes sense, right? I guess holding back on it just so that you can guarantee yourself actually being able to outcast it rather than something else shuffling along the way next turn.
Yep. Oh!
It's gonna have to get going right away though, because Deathwing Mad Aspect, along with one of the worst dragons to go alongside it, is gonna make very quick work of you there, unless you're winning the game right now.
I thought cards couldn't generate themselves. You Sarah.
Har har har.
Of course, it goes for a portal first.
Yeah, there's some creative accounting along the way.
Just like Evocation can get Magic Trick into Evocation. Yeah, I don't think Posesi can quite get there.
Yeah, it's a shame, right? Magtheridon was really his best chance of clearing it, and it's already gone. And I guess at 7 minions on board, Magtheridon can't even do anything.
Yeah. And I suppose that might have been the thinking for not being uber greedy with the Magtheridon, because technically Tyler could wait until he put many minions on board at once, say with a Mount Seller turn.
Yep.
Therefore, oh wait, I don't know where my head is at. At that position, Posesi had one of the guys left on board. I don't think Tyler could have transformed it or buffed it that much.
Yeah, I mean it was already in play. Yeah.
Demons. Demons.
One thing's for sure, the Skull is not doing anything substantial. Neither is the Shard Shatter Mystic.
Right, like, even if he goes Lawkeeper and then Skull, it's just not happening quickly enough. He throws it down, and it does mean that we are equalized at 1 game apiece. Now, the Demon Hunter taking one of the few losses. I think that might be the second loss at all for Posesi so far in this week with the Demon Hunter specifically. And despite getting close, it was just not quite able to deliver enough with the Magtheridon, even though I think his head was in the right place with how he was approaching the Magtheridon early, just to try and smack Tyler in the face.
Yeah, for sure, getting down a 12-12 early against Druid always sounds like a very solid proposition. I just wonder if there's room to experiment with how to actually look at the matchup from a macro perspective, similar to the way that even Quest Warlock, towards the end of the meta where it was really getting popular, still had arguments as to how you're supposed to approach the end game. And I think we could see a lot more testing on this deck as the weeks go by, because largely for week 1, I think a lot of people overlooked Demon Hunter, or at least the control variant, as a possibility for a bring. But given how well it performed so far in the Swiss, we could see a lot more people coming up with those lists later on.
Yeah, I mean, I believe it's very, very meta-dependent. You want to be targeting the aggro decks with it primarily, but it clearly has a spot, right? There's something going on there for Posesi, especially when he has his kind of holistic approach to the lineup, being very controlling overall and trying to hard target those aggro decks. Speaking of those aggro decks, of course, here is Tyler's signature weapon, self-sharpening sword rogue, which, again, I think, for the most part, has a pretty decent matchup against the Druid.
Yeah, not too shabby at all. Tyler's curve is also looking decent. Even though he doesn't have that self-sharpening sword immediately, he could at the least just buff up Dagger with the deadly poison, follow up Corsair, and then always, as always, use that secret passage to smooth out the next couple turns.
So this is where I think things get really complicated already, because first 2 turns, absolutely, play your minions, hit him in the face. The deadly poison here, though, already, I think is somewhat debatable, because we're seeing him time and again go for these medium-sized dagger buffs. You know, he gets up to like 3, 4, maybe 5 attacks. But that doesn't feel like it wins the game in its own right. Should he be holding back on the deadly poison and going for like secret passage to try and find the sword and then buff that up instead?
I feel like it still has its merits, and it unlocks a lot of top decks for Tyler if you go for it, that Heal Dancer off the top, or even just this cheapened Dread Corsair to be alongside, say, Voltaire. Yes, it's ideal to get it with the sword, but if you're relying on top decking sword in the near future, it doesn't seem very likely. So I prefer that Tyler just hedges his bets there.
That's fair. I can get on board with that thinking.
Well, he did pick up the sap to deal with one of the teacher's pets. It's already gotten to that point where if you haven't killed the druid, it feels like you could very well have lost.
Oh, yes. As the sap is not going to be doing all too much to actually help his board presence at all, as the teacher's pet comes straight back down. Going to have to be dealt with once again with, hey, another sap! Right, the damage is coming through now for Tyler.
But it's so awkward. He lacks a mana to be able to dagger up as well to really get some usage out of this Toxin Blade. Dagger's still going to come down to deal with the owl, so he somewhat protects his 3-1. But just if Posesi plays another taunt, and that's likely to only be a fraction of the turn, it would have already been problematic for Tyler. I'm just looking at Taunt Bogbeam Eagle, honestly. And then he's unlikely to die that turn because he has a taunt and he's seen both sap. And then he can follow up with the overflow.
That makes sense to me. Just making sure that you absolutely, positively do not die on this turn. Even with self-sharpening sword off the top, still surviving here.
Surviving, but that is easily Tyler's best draw for that turn, because suddenly the secret passage with the weapon already online becomes so much higher potential.
However, healing up on both himself and the teacher's pet here, huge for Posesi, absolutely huge.
Yeah. So if we're thinking about the dream passage for Tyler, it would have to involve, I guess, a pretty nutty Steel Dancer as well. Because if he just generates some damage to get through the pet, he is not setting up lethal for the next turn against Posesi, and then Posesi will have any measure of crazy things he wants to do. Ooh.
Okay. Finally, secret passage time. He wants some weapon buffs. That'll do nicely. Cutting Cast is huge.
Okay. With the Krasanov, the cutting class is free, but man, this damage lines up so poorly.
Yeah, it's really poor, isn't it? I mean, you could go, like, Krasanov secret passage to try and find backstab.
I like the sound of that. Yeah. It does feel like Tyler needs to push this damage face if he has any chance of winning. There's also the option of just cutting class now to find backstab.
True, yeah.
It
I
doesn't
guess then if
feel like...
you have a lower chance of getting it.
Yeah, the downside is that he wouldn't have the guaranteed extra mana or Spy Mistress.
Mm.
In the shadows.
Okay.
Okay, sign me up.
So only the Secret Passage will get shuffled back into the deck after this. And that means Tyler's next turn, we're looking at Jandis and the Steel Dancer that was in the hand before the passage happened.
Powerful plays coming through for Tyler. It looked like board control was irreparably lost, and maybe that is still the case, given the power of whatever Posesi can do in the next couple of turns with maybe a Kael'thas factoring in. But he does have his own power plays finally coming through. Steel Dancer Jandis is huge.
And Posesi's hand is kind of clunky, actually. I
Yeah.
saw the Kael'thas and thought things were over, but he actually does not have Iron Barks or Bog Beams or Crystal Power or Moonfire. And so the turn for Posesi looks like it's going to be a very fair usage of mana, which Druids never want to be fair with their mana. Now, is this just going to be Eagle plus full cost Defender?
It looks like he's
Okay.
going with a full America play here. Eagle, eagle, eagle.
Yeah, it makes sense. Forgot that the Panther can attack right now, so it's unlikely for Posesi to die from where he's at 16 health.
Whoa!
It is staggeringly close.
It's really starting to stack up now. Lethal
Tyler-
quite cleanly represented for next turn, of course.
Tyler can swing face and net himself a 7-drop from this Steel Dancer. Or he could stay at 6 and believe in the Reckless Rocketeer.
Make something real.
He's starting with Jandis instead.
Whoa!
Wow, double stealth
Tiger!
minions?
That's insane! What?
That's legal?
That is completely illegal.
What?
Whoa!
He cannot interact with these. Oh my god.
Choose soon.
And Tyler can just summon a 7-drop as well.
I think he might actually just go for more stealth, weirdly enough. Just for something that's absolutely impossible to interact with.
Yeah, I wonder if there are any cards
Wow.
in particular that he was worried about being negative for him. If he would essentially Baron Geddon is bad
Yeah.
if it kills off your Wasteland Assassin. But
I think
sure,
it's-
just the stealth is just, yeah, Posesi cannot target it whatsoever.
The stealth, the use of the Eviscerate there, I find it a little bit inconsistent, I guess, with his game plan, because he's going with full stealth rather than development of minions. And in that case, do you really care about a 3-2 being in play? Wouldn't you rather just hit them in the face?
Yeah, it definitely seems that way. Were there any outs for a survival of the fittest lethal if he left it? Not
Yeah,
quite.
I guess that's worth thinking about. Yeah, close, but not quite.
Well, more importantly, Posesi just cannot deal with this. We could see him overflow purely for the healing and the chance to get Anubisoth down.
How do you roll Tiger and Wasteland Assassin for off? Like, that's insane.
Go ask Tyler, not me.
Yeah.
The only way Posesi could have even hoped to deal with part of that board was Nature Studies into Starfall or Swipe. That's not even getting very much done. Tyler,
That was
with
an
the
impressive
game
win.
3.
Yeah, very, very nice stuff from him there. I am starting to learn to respect this rogue deck a little bit more. I've got to learn to appreciate the power of Sword, but also just low-key the power of Secret Passage. It's ludicrous. It's absolutely bananas powerful card that at all points means you have a draw to pull yourself right back into the game. And as we saw there, Cutting Class, Krastinov, Secret Passage, the Sword, it all comes together so beautifully. And when you have that sword in play, this is what the deck does, which is, you know, kind of leading back to what I was saying at the start of the game. It was my thought process behind potentially holding on to the Deadly Poison to go with the Self-Sharpening Sword. But even at the end of all of that, I liked Tyler's start to the game upon consideration because it was just nice and aggressive, and he had a chance to just win the game right at the start.
It was a sight to behold indeed, and that does mean that Tyler only has his warrior to contend with now, whereas Posesi still has to get 2 wins. I do think that the Druid seems to be in a great spot to take a win versus Warrior. This is the matchup we haven't quite seen yet, though, in the Control Demon Hunter versus the Bomb Warrior. And given that both these decks have a lot of potential for burst and a lot of potential for healing, I feel like the deck that relies on card draw less would eventually out on top.
And that being Warrior?
Yeah. At my first instinct, at the very least.
Yeah, I guess so. It's weird, right? Because they both do have an incredibly high amount of healing, but the difference between armor and healing, I think, will become quite apparent here, because obviously, even though you're only drawing the bombs on average 1 or 2 at a time, rather than all at the same time, if any single minion sticks on the warrior side, in addition to that, it can get pretty scary for the Demon Hunter, right?
But the way Tyler's playing it is just curving out the Coin South Sea Captain to just get 2 very annoyingly statted minions online before Posesi has access to Marrow Slicer is interesting because Eldraki... Oh, sorry, that was also 1 short of Eldraki Warblades being able to deal with it. Yeah, I like the idea from Tyler. It just fits his curve pretty well because then he follows up with Anchor and then he follows up with Quartermaster Hero Power. Full count on curve for Posesi means he'll be drawing Militia into most likely Skull afterward.
Yeah, I mean, that's just all the card draw you could ever want, guaranteed. It's just Soul Theologist Militia into Skull into Skull. That is the curve that will happen. And that's going to make it hard, I think, for Tyler to find enough armor, really, enough to counteract all the damage that will come through.
Yeah. And it's not that Posesi wanted the Militia immediately, but the fact that he still has stuff to do on this 5-mana turn, and then he can follow up with the Skull, and then the Lapidary, and he can get very quickly to Magtheridon as well. That's a very, very important card in the matchup. We saw Tyler already expend a Blade Storm. Posesi could be thinking there's a shot to get that Magtheridon down nice and safe.
Tyler's play is no slouch, though. You know, going for a lot of damage right out the gate with Krasnov, it's not going to win the game in its own right. You know, there's no point pretending that because of all the healing that Posesi will likely have access to. But I guess the one solace is that because of Lawkeeper Polkelt, all the healing is guaranteed to be at the bottom of the deck, weirdly enough.
Yeah, and I think the genius of Krasnov on that turn means that Tyler's saying, if you want to play Skull, it's guaranteed you're not dealing with the Krasnov this turn. And I'm actually a bit surprised to see Posesi not respect the Krasnov this turn. He could have deviated a bit and then gone for, say, Militia on the follow-up. Had he gone for the Marrow Slicer, Militia would have gotten quite a few 3/3s on board.
And what it does mean as well is that with Krasnov getting to attack again here for Tyler, Posesi's chunking a lot of damage, and as I said, the healing's at the bottom of the deck.
I just am not sure why he felt the need to Skull immediately there. Of course, it would have gotten locked in the outcast position for that next turn, but it just seems like he's unable to survive given this pressure from Tyler. We can see now the Marrow Slicer, and if he threatened enough, yeah, he can just Blade Dance this to not take any more damage to the face.
Yeah, I like it a lot. With the cards shuffled in now, there's a good chance of him finding some healing to get him out of range, because even though the damage was scary, I guess it was unlikely to actually be killing him in the next few turns.
But that coupled with bombs in the deck, it feels like it's a little bit scary. But time will tell, because getting those guaranteed Lapidaries down for cheap is also really huge. That's the biggest benefit of Posesi going for Skull on curve. Because he could just ship tons of damage to face right now.
Right.
Like
there's a
19?
couple of ways that you can go about it.
I'm gonna win big.
Oh, he was looking for additional burst here. most
Probably just
likely.
mystery choice, right? Unless you want to draw a card
Yeah.
with Consume Magic.
Yeah, looks like mystery to me. We take Soul Shard instead. Okay, that's somewhat removal. And putting down both the Lapidaries makes it so that if Tyler wants to go for Blade Storm, he has to swing into the Volpera first. That's more damage to Tyler's face. And that is very good for Posesi because he's just looking at second Marrow Wind Slice to close out the game. However, Skipper turn is going to make his plans a lot more complicated.
Yeah, it just makes it, I think, a lot nice and cleaner to clear up this board. How exactly he wants to go about it is a little bit more up for question because I think, or rather I thought at first that he was looking at a a play of going for the Blade Storm, but because of his timing, he actually isn't able to do that now.
Oh wow, and he has to use both shield slams like this. It was a pretty complex turn that I don't know if there was a better way to go about that with the Skippers. Not enough health on them overall. But that's many resources expended.
I think the play might have actually just been to go Blade Storm first in order to deal 3 damage to everything and then follow up.
With the Skipper, Smith, and
right, because
Yeah.
A big part of it is just that you want to get all the armor, obviously.
Makes a lot of sense. And Posesi, I didn't realize he had so few fragments left at this point. But it's still pressure that Tyler needs to respect, be it with the Deathwing or...
If he'd drawn one more, it would have been a soul fragment. We like to have fun here.
As always. The Deathwing surviving at 1 HP looked pretty nice to me because if Posesi wants to deal with it, it has to be a non-attack buffing spell. And I-Beam is... Gosh, it's hard to say how far down we are in the Old Celt hierarchy, but Tyler should have that knowledge, right?
Well, no, because the cards were shuffled in, right? So the Pole Celt doesn't exist anymore. As soon as you shuffle in soul fragments, the deck just becomes randomized again.
Oh, that's my bad. The point remains, though, that it's gonna take a chance from Posesi to deal with the Deathwing. And wake up the Magtherodon as well, and also threaten lethal on the backswing.
Wow, nice.
Yeah, perfect outcome. Means he can send this 3 damage face. Not at all irrelevant, because Tyler at 21 and then down to possibly... down to 16. It means the Magtherodon hit plus Marrow Slicer is, even if there's an armor up, there's the second slice.
Yeah, he really, really wanted this Magtherodon to survive. But obviously, Blade Storm, one of the most flexible removal cards we've seen in a while in Hearthstone, makes very, very quick work of that. And all of a sudden, Posesi has to find some extra way of ramping up the damage. This deck is very, very far from having infinite damage potential. It doesn't run the Metamorphosis. Obviously, both Soul Shard Lapidaries have gone. Marrow Slicer is close to the majority of the damage left over.
Oh, it is so scary because Posesi wants to cycle to find healing, but the more he cycles, there's also the chance of drawing bombs. It's another probability question.
There's also the chance of drawing the soul fragments as well, which
That's
could
why
heal him.
He kinda wants to draw.
Yeah. Okay, he's alive.
Every single draw feels like he's standing at the edge of the cliff. Oh my gosh, he's not alive! Sticky Fingers steals...
Whoa! That's just game right then.
Yeah, the Marrow Slicer. What? Hello?
Insane outcome to end the game there. Absolutely ridiculous. Posesi needed to get the extra soul fragment to be able to stay alive, but in the end, as hard as he may have fought, it's Tyler who ends up the victor, and we get to see Tyler's beautiful young head.
Oh, so cute there. Okay, sorry, babies are my weakness, but
That is
Tyler
adorable.
did there end the game with the sticky finger, which calls back to Posesi having that very timely sticky finger on the self-sharpening sword in game 1. Low-key, the MVP of that entire series is that innocuous 4-4.
Oh, I thought you were going to say low-key, the key to that entire series was the innocuous baby, which I agree with completely. That really rounded everything out beautifully. Obviously, congratulations to Tyler's sister Min on a beautiful baby that you now have. We are, I think, proud to call it the mascot of Asia Pacific Hearthstone Grandmasters.
Oh, yes, indeed. Tyler's mom already had a featured moment in the Best Pop-Off Awards for the Hearthies. I'm very excited to see his niece also pop up sometime in the top 5 moments in the future.
That's right. But that does mean that we are pretty much all wrapped up here for today. Tyler will be going through to the semi-finals, which we can take a look at now for our top 4 that we're going to be playing out tomorrow. Bank Yugi and Tyler made their way through to the top 4 today, to be joining, of course, Chonsu and Surrender, who had a killer day yesterday.
Yes, indeed. Chonsu, I think, having the most impressive record in terms of just win-to-loss ratio, but Bank Yugi having the flashiest game so far by a long mile. When we see him face off against Surrender, that's going to be yet another tough opponent for him to truly prove that he belongs here in Grandmasters. What better way to mark your entrance into GM than by beating probably one of the most famous players in the entire roster?
Without a shadow of a doubt, there's there's a lot of skill to be gained, or a big skill difference, I think, between Surrender and a lot of the other players in the pack in Asia Pacific. So taking a win over him would be huge for Bank Yugi to cement his spot here in Grandmasters, especially with his very off-the-wall lineup in terms of decks. But that, of course, all has to happen tomorrow, because it's already been an unusually long day here in Asia Pacific. I'm going to get things moving nice and quickly and send us over to Europe, of course, and then Americas at the end of the day with TJ and Frodan. So from myself and Gia, thanks for joining us today. We will be back at the same time tomorrow, or actually, I take that back, ever so slightly later starting time tomorrow. But still, the finals to be played out tomorrow to find out who will be our winner for week 1. We cannot wait, and we'll see you tomorrow. For now, enjoy Europe.